Ashley Rauscher at the John Burton Foundation or Deanna Glick with the Judicial Council. So with that, let's go ahead. Oh, some logistics. If you are having technical difficulties, I think the best thing to do would probably be to email Debbie at the John Burton Foundation. And Debbie, sorry, what's your email?
So actually, the easiest thing to do is at the bottom of the control panel that everybody has on your screen is a place that says questions. So if you are having a problem or anything comes up or you just have a question, you can just type that question in on the control panel and that'll come directly to me. If you're having such technical difficulties that doesn't even work, then you can email me at Debbie, D-E-B-B-I-E, at johnburtonfoundation.org. And questions that you have about content as well, that's the same place you would use that question box to type those in.
Great, thank you. Okay, so let's get going. Well, if my screen will advance. Sorry, folks, bear with me 1 second here.
You know, I've had people have this happen before. I think you might have to close out of your PowerPoint and come back in and then try again.
Okay, I will do that. Sorry, everybody. Give me 1 moment here. Oh, looks like we finally got there. Okay. So just an overview of the webinar today. We're going to talk about the schedule for the legislative visits. We're going to talk about the teams that we are forming and which you'll be leading. And then we're going to go over in some detail the 2 bills that we're going to be talking about during the legislative visits, as well as the talking points in support of those bills. And then finally, we're going to go over some general helpful tips for having a great legislative visit. The schedule for the day. So you all probably know that because of the size of this year's Education Summit, that we are the summit into 2 different groups for mealtime. And that is because we cannot fit all 800 people in a room and have them sit down and enjoy their lunch. So on Tuesday, there are going to be folks who are attending an early lunch and folks who are attending a late lunch. And all of you as team captains will be scheduled for the late lunch, and we'll go immediately from lunch over to the Capitol for the legislative visits. So this means that lunch for all of us will be from 12:45 to 1:45. And then at 1:45, we're going to begin to gather into our teams. And the way that this is going to work is you are going to be at a table as a team captain, and each of you will be assigned, I think it's a number, it might be a color, but I'm pretty sure it's a number. And while folks are eating lunch, Deanna, Debbie, and I will be going around and handing out tickets to the legislative visits, and each one of those tickets will correspond to a team number. And so at 1:45, folks that are in team 1, 2, 3, etc., will go to the table that you will be sitting at to gather in their teams for the legislative visits. At 2 o'clock, from 2 to 2:15, we'll have an overview of the bills and the tips for everybody, just to make sure we're on the same page. And just so you all know, we actually will be training the youth who are coming with Foster Club on Sunday on doing the legislative visits. So the youth will be well trained, and 2 to 2:15 is really for the adult participants, and maybe the youth will help us train the grown-ups. At 2:15, we will meet in our teams to figure out who's going to kick off the legislative visit, who's going to close it by making an ask, and what information various team members will share throughout the legislative visit. From 2:30 to 2:45, you're going to head over to the Capitol, and we will print out directions to the Capitol for those of you who aren't familiar with Sacramento. The hotel is very close by, so it shouldn't be a problem, but we certainly don't want anyone to get lost en route. And between 2:45 and 3:15, you'll be over at the Capitol, and you'll be having your very first meeting with a member of the legislature. 3:15 to 3:45 will be your second meeting, and then at 3:45, you're going to return your feedback sheet that we will have provided to you to Deanna, who is going to be stationed throughout the legislative visits in the basement cafeteria, just in case anybody gets lost or has last-minute questions, and you'll also have our cell phone number in case you need it. One wrinkle to the day is actually a great one, and that is that one of the bills is actually up in hearing that very day at 1:30, and so some of the youth will be attending the hearing rather than going to the legislative visits, and it's great because they'll be able to provide testimony and support of, I think it's the Chafee bill that they'll be talking about, but that just means that we're going to be kind of having to jockey around a little bit with that group of youth to get them over to the hearing at its start, which is at 1:30. That is the schedule for the day. Teams. So we estimate that we're going to have about 20 teams of 4 to 5 members each. There is a team captain, obviously, who is you. And every team should have a youth. And like I said earlier, youth members will have been prepped for the ledge visits during the Foster Club Youth Leadership Academy on Sunday. And we're hoping to do an exercise with them to help them identify stories and more personal talking points that they'll be able to share during the legislative visits. The teams will have that period of time from 2:15 to 2:30 to work together to come up with basically an outline of the visits. And during this time, you're going to want to make sure that everyone understands the basics of the bills and the talking points. Again, the youth members will have had a training on it and will have just gone over that with the entire group. You're also going to want to identify whether any of the team members live or work or go to school in the member's district. You want to make an outline for the visit, and we actually will have a handy worksheet in the packet of materials you'll receive to help you do this. So, for example, you would want to have one member summarize each bill, and you'd want to have another member share a brief personal story that illustrates the need for the bill, and then finally select a member who is going to do that direct ask to the legislative staffer saying, hey, you know, is this something that your boss will support? You want to make sure that you're walking over to the Capitol as a team to avoid getting separated. And, you know, this has happened in the past, so that's why we're emphasizing it here. There's just a lot going on and a lot of teams and a lot of folks, so you just want to make sure that you're, you know, using your best field trip buddy system skills and walking over to the Capitol as a team. And like I said, if you run into any problems, Deanna will be posted in the basement cafeteria of the Capitol and able to help. So we have 2 bills that we are going to be talking about during the legislative visits, and we're going to go into these in more detail in just a moment. But to give you a big, broad overview, Assembly Bill 2506 is regarding Chafee grants, and the author is Tony Thurmond. The sponsors are the John Burton Foundation, the National Center for Youth Law, and the Children's Advocacy Institute. And basically what the bill would do is it would make the Chafee education and training vouchers available to all foster youth who meet eligibility for the grant. We'll also be talking about Senate Bill 906, and this bill is about priority registration for foster youth in for college courses, and the author is Jim Bell. The sponsors are John Burton Foundation, the California Community Colleges Chancellor's Office, and the California Community Colleges EOPS Association. And EOPS is, oh, I always forget what the acronym is. Debbie, help me out. Oh, Extended Opportunity Program. So what this bill does is it preserves priority registration for foster youth at all of California's community colleges. Right now, the law would sunset that priority registration provision, and we want to make sure that that does not happen and that foster youth continue to receive priority registration. So you are going to be meeting with members of the Senate and Assembly higher education committees, and there's going to be different asks of the members' staff based on who they are and what's coming in front of them. So you're going to be asking education committee members to vote yes on AB 2506, asking them to vote yes on SB 906, or you might be saying thank you if the vote has already happened. And we're also going to be meeting with members of the budget subcommittees and asking them to include funding for AB 2506, that's the Chafee bill, in the state budget. And so depending on who you're meeting with, you might be asking for all of these things or some of these things, but you'll know what the ask is because we will give you that information in the packet of materials that you receive. So you will know that I'm meeting with Assemblymember Thurmond and I am going to ask him to vote yes on AB 2506, or I'm going to ask him to make sure that funding for AB 2506 is included in the state budget. You're also going to be meeting possibly with members of the Senate and Assembly leadership and the governor's office, asking them to lend their support to the bills and to the budget request. In addition, there is the Foster Care Select Committee. The Select Committee is really for educational purposes, and eventually those committee members will be voting on the floor of the Assembly and Senate in support of the bills. But these are, you know, a great group of folks who really care about foster care issues and are influential on foster care issues, so it's important that we meet with them. And then you'll also be meeting with committee consultants, and these are the staffers for the education committees and for the budget subcommittee who basically do the analysis and tell their bosses, you know, what issues are going on with the bill, whether or not there are problems. So again, very important folks to meet with. And again, individualized instructions regarding your asks are going to be provided. So you don't need to worry about that. You just need to know that it's going to vary depending on who you're meeting with. And I think I already mentioned that we'll have a subset of youth who will be going to the Assembly Education Committee hearing taking place that afternoon rather than joining the legislative visits. But that is something that you just need to be aware of. Again, it's not something that you need to worry about. We'll be preparing them for providing public comment in support of the bill. Okay, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to Debbie to talk about the Chafee Education and Training Voucher Bill.
Great, thank you, Molly. So a couple things I want to say in way of introduction. First of all, we are going to be I will send out a copy of this PowerPoint presentation to everybody. It is being recorded if you want to listen to it again. And we will be providing fact sheets and talking points and all that in writing. So everything that I'm going to walk through here will be provided to you in writing. So no need to like take lots of notes on the content of the bill. It's the first thing I want to say. AB 2506 is, of the two bills, this is a bigger priority bill only because it's a much more challenging bill. So SB 906, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes, that's related to priority registration, we are predicting is going to have a relatively easy time getting through the process. AB 2506 is going to have a relatively hard time getting through the process, and hence the need to sit down with the legislators, or more likely their staff members, and really let them know why this is so important. In a nutshell, what AB 2506 does, some of you are probably familiar already with the Chafee Education and Training Voucher. So this is money that it's grant funds, it's not a loan, that is available to foster youth to help them attend college. They can go to a community college, a CSU, a UC, a private institution. They can go out of state. They can go to a career and technical school. And it's up to $5,000, although the actual amount varies depending on what their need is. And right now, there's not enough money to go around. So part of the money comes from the federal government, part of it comes from the state government. What this would do would be to expand the pool of resources so that everybody who meets the basic qualifications for Chafee actually gets a grant if they apply for it. The bill is going to be amended actually in the next few days to add a deadline to that. So basically what it's going to say is anybody who submits a Chafee application and is eligible by September 2nd will get a grant. There's a second provision to it, which is that colleges that don't meet certain graduation and loan default criteria won't be eligible to get the money. So this is modeled after an existing program with the Cal Grants, where some proprietary schools who are more predatory and don't do a good job of actually making sure their students graduate and pay back their loans can't get Cal Grants anymore, and this would apply those same criteria to Chafee grants as well. Next slide.
Sorry, I seem to be having trouble advancing the slides again. There we go. Sorry about that.
No problem. So a little bit of background. The Chafee program was established in 2002 by Congress in recognition of the fact that foster youth attain college degrees at rates that are far below the general population. There's a lot of statistics out there now that show that foster youth fare poorly on entering community college, persistence, completing 30 units, maintaining a 2.0 GPA. One of the materials that is actually going to be in your packet is a report called Charting the Course, which is where a lot of this data actually comes from. And so if people want more information about how we know that foster youth are faring so poorly, you can reference them to that report that you'll have. On the flip side, there's actually evidence now that the Chafee program is an effective tool. Students who receive Chafee are 52% more likely to complete 3 semesters or more of community college than foster youth who do not receive the Chafee grant. So it is, in fact, an effective program. A little bit more background in terms of who qualifies for a Chafee grant. You have to be under age 22 and have been in foster care at some point after the age of 16. That's the subset of foster youth who actually qualify to get the grant. Next slide. So Chafee ETV funding has remained the same since 2002, despite the fact that the number of foster youth attending college has increased. Because of AB 12 and other factors, we see that there's actually been a 38% increase in the number of foster youth attending community college. We don't, unfortunately, have data for the 4-year institutions, so we can't say one way or another, but given the increase in community college attendance, if somebody asks, we can speculate that there's probably been some level of increase at the 4-year institutions as well. Despite this increase in the number of students, foster youth students attending college, the amount for the Chafee grant has remained stagnant since 2002. It hasn't changed. As a result, because of insufficient funds, 1 out of 4 eligible applicants don't actually receive the grant. Another problem is the fact that Chafee can be used at these post-secondary schools that haven't complied with the minimum requirements for the Cal Grant program. So that's another piece that this bill is intended to address. Next slide. So what this would do, again, in a nutshell, if you apply by September 2nd and you meet the qualifications, if this bill passes, all of those people would get a grant. An added benefit to this is that everybody would get their grant at the beginning of the year. Right now, there's sort of this rolling process that happens where a lot of students get their grants late in the year, at which point they might have already dropped out. And if everybody is entitled to a grant, then they all get dispersed at the same time at the beginning of the year. And then the second piece, as I've already said, it does require institutions to meet these baseline criteria of a 30% graduation rate and no higher than a 15.5% loan default rate in order to receive the money. Next slide. So talking points, and again, we are going to give you a handout with the talking points. But basically, the gist of it is what we've talked about. The problem is that the Chafee program remains at 2002 funding, and 25% of eligible students are not able to access it. Second problem is that colleges that we want to not encourage our youth to attend because of the poor job that they are doing are still able to get access to this money. The solution, the bill would tighten up the grant process by instituting a deadline of September 2nd. all eligible students who meet the deadline would receive a grant, and the bill would prohibit the use of the funds at an institution that doesn't meet those basic graduation and default rate requirements. Next slide. So this slide shows talking points for youth. And again, this is going to be a handout that we're going to give you. And what we're asking the youth to do is start by saying their name, what school they attended, and a little bit about their experience in foster care, which could be how old they were when they entered care, how long they were in care, how many placements they had, whatever they feel comfortable sharing. The goal with this is really just to illustrate why the experience of a foster care student is different from another disadvantaged student. And then what they would say would vary depending on if they received a Chafee grant or didn't receive a Chafee grant. If they did, then they would talk about how they benefited from it. So did it provide some added stability in their housing? Did it pay for school fees that they would have otherwise not been able to pay and they would have had to drop out? Having the resource allowed them to stay focused on their studies. Maybe knowing that they were going to have access to this made it feel like the system was on their side and gave them the confidence to go to college. On the flip side, if they didn't receive a Chafee grant, then they can share the challenges of not having adequate financial support. So were they ever dropped from classes because they couldn't pay their fees? Did they have to forego paying their rent or food or something because they didn't have enough money? Were they homeless at some point? Were they unable to buy books? Did they have to drop classes so that they could work more hours? Did they have to take out loans? Could they not focus on school because they were too focused on the financial burden? So depending on what their circumstances, they're going to choose one of those options in terms of what they're going to think about to say with their talking points. Next slide. So you're likely to not just have youth in the group, but also adults who maybe don't have that direct experience with the Chafee program. So in their case, they're going to really just sort of cite the statistics and the information that we've shared with you thus far to support the case for the bill. So give the background that it was established in 2002 because foster youth do so poorly in college. We know that they fare worse, and maybe cite some of these statistics. At age 26, only 6% of foster youth have a post-secondary degree as compared to a third of general population. Provide the statistic that 52% of those who receive a Chafee grant, that students who receive a Chafee grant are 52% more likely to complete 3 semesters than those who don't. 1 in 4 didn't receive a grant because there's not enough money. As a result, foster youth sleep on their friends' couches, they don't buy the textbooks they need, they drop out, etc. And then say a word about, in addition, that the grant can be used at these predatory institutions that we don't want to encourage youth to be able to go to. And so adopting these standards would ensure the effective use of this financial resource. Next slide. So I'm going to turn over to Diana. Before I do, I just want to say one last thing, which is, we're asking you to do a lot in a pretty short period of time. And so that period of time that we're giving you to prep with your group is going to be really a crucial time to really sort of walk through and say, okay, what's your story? What's your story? What statistic are you going to say, and map that out? So, it's a lot of information, but we hope that we're giving you some tools so you can boil it down into a cohesive package that you can then present to the legislator or staff person that you're working with. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Diana, who's going to talk about SB 906.
Well, and Debbie, before we do that, did we want to give folks a chance to ask questions specifically about 2506 before we moved on, or?
Yes, thank you for reminding me. I totally forgot. If you have any questions about 2506, you can type them in the question panel. If you happen to be on the phone, you could raise your hand and you could ask it out loud, but I see that most people are listening through their computers. I'm not seeing any questions. If you think of them down the line, you can type them in at any point, but since we're not seeing any yet, Diana, you can go ahead.
We'll move on. Okay, so this is Deanna Glick, and I'm the person who I think is best known at this point for being posted in the basement on the day of the visit, so I'm very excited about that. I'll be down there in the cave. Come and see me. But I would like to talk to you a little bit about SB 906, which is the priority registration bill. And as Debbie and Molly both mentioned, this one is looks like so far, fingers crossed, it's going to be fairly straightforward and simple going through the process, but it does not hurt to know what the contents of the bills are when you are going to speak in favor of them. So just to give you a brief overview, as most of you probably know, there are priority registration laws in place right now for foster youth and for disabled youth. And those have been in place since 2011. Actually, they were initiated in 2012, but when they were put into the law, they put a sunset law in there, a sunset bill that essentially says that these are going to expire on January 1 of 2017 unless someone comes in and takes out that sunset clause or does something else with it. So that's really the purpose of SB 906, is to remove that sunset clause to allow the priority registration to continue. It also makes a change to the definition of foster youth and former foster youth, and it really brings that definition in line with other programs right now that are benefiting foster youth education. Next slide, please. So to give you a little bit of background, as I mentioned, the priority registration was established for foster youth in 2011. Students with disabilities followed in 2013, as did low-income students and those participating in that EOPS program in 2013. It helps students register for courses before everyone else, so that is definitely going to help the foster youth get the required courses they need, hopefully shorten their time to degree completion, and reduce financial aid utilization overall if they can get the classes they need and get out the door. So we do have a little bit of data. According to a survey in November of 2015, there were 7,879 foster youth who utilized priority registration during the 14-15 academic year. And we have some similarly high rates of use among low-income students and students with disabilities. Next slide, please. So the reason that we keep putting problem on everything is that it's nice to frame for staff and members, frame these bills as, you know, here's the problem and here's how this bill is solving that problem. So the problem with SB 906 is that, you know, currently we're educating over 2.8 million students, and among those 2.8 million is a very small population of foster youth, students with disabilities, and low-income students. And those groups tend to experience many more difficulties than the general population in getting the courses they need and graduating. So we do have some data from the 2013 study at greater risk that showed that those particular groups mentioned just fare worse overall. And by age 26, they're much less likely to hold a degree at all. So we have 6% of foster youth, 10% of low-income students, and 29% of students with disabilities, compared with 50% among the general population. Next slide, please. And guess what? SB 906 is the solution to this problem. So it has two key, SB 906 has two key provisions. The first would be to remove that sunset date that I mentioned before, and I think the plan is to remove it completely. So we're not extending the sunset, we're just simply saying priority registration will remain in effect, period. And then the second piece is to slightly change the definition of foster youth and former foster youth. Currently in the law, foster youth are eligible for priority registration if they were in foster care on or after their 18th birthday and they are under the age of 24. And so under the new criteria, which I mentioned before, it brings it in line with other types of programs for foster youth. They would be eligible if they were in foster care on or after their 16th birthday and were under the age of 26 at the time that the school year begins. Next slide, please. So here are your talking points, once again broken down into these two major categories. First of all, this priority registration is set to expire. We feel like it's been a positive for these students and we want to continue it. And the definition for foster youth isn't well aligned with other programs. So that's the problem, and the solution is SB 906. Next slide. So in terms of youth talking points, youth are going to be critical in this conversation because they're going to be able to give their own experiences about what it's like to try to register for classes right now. So we will ask the youth to share their names, what school they attend, a little bit about their experience, as Debbie sort of walked us through earlier. And we really want to hear from them directly how priority registration helped them. Hopefully we'll have some students who have experienced it. There's some examples here. There may have been classes that you couldn't have accessed otherwise. We all know, well, some of us who have had contact with the system know that registration is one of those really dog-eat-dog kind of situations, and you've got to get in there quickly and get your classes, otherwise you're going to be out of luck for the semester. So there may be many situations where people have been able to access classes that otherwise they would not be able to do. Without priority registration, it might have taken longer for them to get those courses and ultimately to finish up their degree. They might have ended up using more financial aid because they've had to extend semesters. They may have been able to, with priority registration, select specific classes knowing that they would get certain professors who they really wanted. And, you know, sort of in a more emotional sense, you know, they may have felt very supported by priority registration and the fact that, okay, this, you know, these people are here to help me and the system's on my side and I can do this. Next slide, please. So supportive adults also have a lot to say here. Again, we'll ask you to state your name and your organization affiliation and your role. You can talk about the academic success rates or lack of success rates, which are disproportionately lower than the general population. You can cite to the 2013 study showing that foster youth are not faring as well as the general population in all of these variety of areas. You can speak to how priority registration helps to sort of level the playing field, allowing students to register for courses before the larger student population. You can speak to the importance of aligning the definition of foster youth and former foster youth with other definitions in code and how that just sort of streamlines everything. That's good government. Everyone likes to hear that. And then, you know, you're always, of course, free to add any personal observations you may have. If you're affiliated with community college or a CSU, you may have your own perspectives on this issue. So are there any questions about SB 906? Are we seeing any? I'm not seeing any, but I don't know if I would.
No questions.
Okay. So maybe we can move on to the next slide, which is some tips for a successful legislative visit. This was drafted with the students in mind. So we are planning, as Molly mentioned, to meet with them the Sunday before the conference to walk them through this process. And so we've kind of distilled some of the major ideas into this, but it's always good to review it, even if you're not a student. So we will be encouraging them to prepare ahead of time by reading all the informational materials. And as Debbie said, all of these things will be in packets for you. You're not going to have to remember this stuff, and you will be able to provide another written version of all the fact sheets and talking points to the students. But it's always good to read ahead of time, know what you're going to be talking about. We are going to be providing an outline. So I have on the second do is to make a plan and develop an outline of the visit. So we'll be sharing with you sort of a real basic outline that you can fill in with your team members in the 15 minutes that you have to prep and assign out the jobs in terms of summarizing the bill, sharing a personal experience, and then the direct ask to the member or staff member. We do encourage you and other members of the team to share personal stories if that works for you and you have a very compelling story that really brings it home for the members and the staff to understand that there are real people that are being affected by these bills. Do stay on topic and try not to bring up unrelated issues, and I've been told to emphasize this for everyone. I guess, you know, whenever you have a big group of people, there's always that risk that a conversation can sort of get off tangent, or people come in sort of with their own opinions and agendas, and it's really important with the 15 or 20 minutes that you have with the member to try to stay on topic and get through your points to get your message across. Do make sure to leave the written materials that will be in the packet, leave them with the member or the staff member so that they can refer to them later. If there's someone in your group who lives, works, or goes to school in the member's district, definitely want to highlight that. They always want to know when they are talking to constituents. That's really important to members. And if there are students or other members of your team who want a picture with the member, that's usually just fine, and that's very common to have happen. So they're very used to having staff take their picture. That's great. You can also share a picture with the office so that they can include it on social media. You can include it on social media as long as everyone gives their permission to have their image used. And that's a great way to share your experience with other people and also encourage the member to be talking about the bills. Next slide, please. And then we just have a few don'ts. One would be not to be terribly disappointed if you only get to meet with staff instead of a member. Staff obviously do a lot of these meetings. They're in constant communication with their members, and they will be taking the written information back. And staff provides a huge service to the member in terms of knowing what the bills are about and being able to brief the member quickly. So it's very valuable to have time with staff. I recommend that you try not to exceed the time you've been given for the visit. Many times these visits are scheduled rather tightly, and you don't want to, run over your time too much because it just kind of pushes everything off and people start to get tense. And then finally, don't bring gifts of any value to members. There's lots of rules about that. So unfortunately, even things like, a picture that might have been drawn by a child, if you put it in an expensive frame, that becomes problematic for people. So I just mentioned that because sometimes people want to bring gifts to the member or something that represents their district, and it's better not to, unfortunately. So those are the tips. And if we want to go to the next one, I think they are summarized in these three.
Sorry, can I jump in really quickly? Before we kind of get to the close, I remembered something that I wanted to say about AB 2506 that I forgot.
Oh, okay.
I just want to throw that in really quickly. I just wanted to clarify one thing, which is that there are two parallel processes going on with AB 2506. There's the bill itself, which is AB 2506, but because the bill is going to cost money, there's a process that we have to go through to get it into the budget. And those two things happen simultaneously to each other, but they're not actually the same thing. They're two different things, getting the bill passed and getting the money in the budget. And so Molly talked at the beginning about the different asks that you're going to be making. And so I wanted to just clarify with AB 2506 in particular that in some cases you're going to be meeting with the policy committee, and actually the ask is a yes vote on AB 2506. But in other cases, you're meeting with a member of the budget committee, and the ask is not actually a yes vote on the bill. It's put the money in the budget so that if the bill passes, the money is there to implement it. So I just wanted to make that clarification so that people understand that when you get your packets and you see who you're meeting with.
Great. Okay. So I don't know if there are any questions about anything at all.
I'm not seeing any questions coming in at the moment.
That must just mean that we're crystal clear and everyone knows all they need to know, and hopefully that's the case. But if it's not, and as you think about this, any questions come up, please feel free to reach out to any of the three of us with your questions. We're happy to talk with you and make sure that you're feeling comfortable and confident about how the day is going to go. And I think it is going to be a great day. We're excited to have so many people participate, and that it's good that we have such a large crowd because it's really making us think all of this through and make sure that everyone is prepared as they can possibly be. So we hope that this has been helpful, and I'm talking slowly just in case any questions are coming in now. And we're really
not seeing any, so.
Okay. We're looking forward to summit.
Well, somebody wants to know, when will the presentation be forwarded to us? We can do that this afternoon. I can get it out along with the link to the recording this afternoon.
Any other questions?
When will we get our packets? Molly,
you will get your packets at the summit at the time of the ledge visit, so during that lunch period. But if you are interested in having the materials ahead of time, let us know and we can probably email out the electronic version of the common documents that everybody will have, like the talking points and the fact sheets.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I'm happy to PDF that and have it available for anyone who wants to review.
One person wants to know if it's possible to pick up their packet on Monday to be able to sort of review it, I guess.
Yeah, I think that should be possible. I'll need to figure out the logistics of how to do that.
Yeah. The person who's asking that, I'd say you can go ahead and email me directly. This is one of my people, one of my recruits. So why don't you send me an email and me and Molly will figure out how we can get that to you. That actually reminded me of one other thing that I realized I forgot to say, which is that we would love it if all of the team captains can get together at about 1:30. So technically lunch goes till 1:45, but we're hoping all the team captains can make sure you finish your lunch in 45 minutes and we can convene you as a group. If you can just come up to the front of the room where the podium is, and that way we can just make sure everybody's there and kind of suss out the lay of the land for the room and everything. I'm not seeing anything else.
Okie doke. Well, thanks so much, everybody. We hope this was helpful. And again, as questions come up, please don't hesitate to reach out to one of us, and we'll do our best to get those answered. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye.